Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about an experience that I had many years ago when I was working like crazy, right? And I learned about something new. This was actually, I did understand these principles about the subconscious, not to the degree that I understand it now, but I did understand a good chunk of it. And I learned about basically a new phenomenon that I call transcendental productivity, which I thought was useful to talk about here. And this is basically just a consequence of everything we already spoke about. But yeah, so this was actually fresh off the experience that I talked about before when I had learned about the antithetical nature between charging for the purpose of emotional pleasure and charging or just really focusing on accomplishing purpose, right? Achieving some goal. And so when you focus on one, your subconscious will generally charge the direction of one, but it's hard to charge it for both, right? So you have to pick one. So around this time, where I had realized that I wasn't focusing on improving myself in a lot of ways, there were things in my life I needed to change, right? So that's where I kind of, I wouldn't say went cold turkey, but I kind of stopped focusing as much, right, on just charging emotional pleasure, right? As good as it felt, right, I needed to now focus more on purpose. And then around that time, I had I was in a kind of financial hole with things I wanted to, there were certain financial goals I wanted to reach, things I wanted to do that required money, which I didn't have at the time. So I was like, you know what? Because I had these problems or these issues, these things I needed to sort of buy. I had them it was an issue for me for years, right? And I was like, I just didn't know how I was going to get the money to accomplish this. One of the goals mainly was actually I needed to move out, get my own place. There's a reason I wanted to do that. It's a little bit personal, but it was one of the things I just kind of needed to do, but I just didn't know how I was going to have the money to do that. There's kind of a lot more I'm not saying. But, for example, I was kind of being exploited for my money at the time, which I didn't realize by someone close to me. But suffice it to say that it was tough for me to get the money that I needed. And I just kind of put that goal off in terms of trying to get the money I needed. I put that goal off for years because I just didn't know how I was going to get it. So I didn't really think about it very much. But then, around this time, I'm like, no, I have to focus on this goal. I have to achieve it no matter what it takes. So then I decided, all right, I'm going to sort of focus and figure out, I'm going to focus and figure out how to sort of manage a schedule between multiple jobs to get the money I needed. Because when I was younger, right, when I was much younger, I did work 2 jobs. And I remember one time, it was so bad, right? I was between work because I didn't drive at the time. And I was going to school. I was going to college full time. And I was taking a bus. So I had 2 jobs, one full time, one part time. And I was going to college full time, which that's a lot to do. You know what I mean? So I basically had a lot on my plate at the time. And I had the same financial issues. I was still being exploited around that time too when I was much younger for money. So needless to say, it was a very hard time for me, right? But I was trying to do all these things to sort of reach, a bright future, right, with college. And I remember I was working so hard at one point. Well, more specifically, I was on my feet all day. I was just on my feet for such a long time. I remember one time I was so tired. I used to work at Walmart, and I was pulling these milk crates into the back, and it's I'm pretty sure that you can describe it, the experience I had by saying I basically passed out. Right? More specifically, I kind of fell asleep while pulling the crates. Right? So I don't know that you would quite call it passed out, but I just feel like I couldn't control it is really what I'm getting at. I was trying my hardest to stay awake, right? Because I was so tired. And I was just pulling these crates and with this jack. And then I just, next thing I know is I hear a whole bunch of crates falling, right? So I crashed into something and all the crates fell. There was nothing in them, luckily. And that's basically what woke me up, right? So that's how I even knew I was sleeping. And what was crazy is I was trying so hard to stay awake and there was just nothing I can do about it. It's still, even to me now, it's still a blur, right? It was just happening one moment. I was trying to stay awake one moment. The next moment I hear a whole bunch of crates falling, right? So that's how tired I was, right? And I was like that a lot. But also, I remember my legs like hurt so much. And I was like, how old? I was in my early, I was in like my early 20s. So it might have been like 22. 20, I don't think I was 23. I think it was 22 at the time. And like, my legs hurt so much that I actually thought they were going to break or I was going to get some type of injury, right? And so ever since that experience, right, and I did stop, I kind of, something had to give, right? I wasn't going to be able to live like that, right? I think I just ended up not going to school at the time, which sucks, but that's kind of a longer story because we're actually ties into, I actually believe now that was kind of a reason that happened in a more spiritual way, which I obviously didn't recognize at the time. So we're going to talk more about that later in book 2. But ultimately, though, I learned from that experience, or I kind of felt from that experience that, I really shouldn't push myself too much, in terms of working. And it was kind of a good thing, but also a bad thing, right? Because from that experience, I did have like a second job later, but I always remembered that experience, right? And I was like, I'm not going to push myself too hard, and which is good. But the bad part is I kind of thought it was almost like a sin in a way to work too hard, right? I kind of thought that if you work really hard, it's almost like a form of self-abuse because that's how it felt then, right? And so for a long time, I kind of had this attitude that I worked, right? So I worked 40 hours a week, no problem. Did other things, but I just was against working too hard, right? It's like I felt you're abusing yourself spiritually and it was basically sinful. And so then, fast forward many years later, right? I was like, when I focused on these goals ahead that I talked about earlier, I was like, you know what? There's no way I'm achieve this unless I go back to working like kind of as hard as I did then. And I really didn't want to, but I'm like, there's just no way I'm achieve this goal. So I'm like, you know what? I'm about to just work as hard as I possibly can. And I'm just going to keep doing whatever it takes. I was planning to work two full-time jobs, 40 hours a week, in order to reach my financial goals. And I was like, I was only planning to stop if I came what I felt was close to dying. So that was the only thing that was going to make me stop. I don't care how much I have to suffer. I don't care how much my body aches and pains or whatever, or how tired I am, and none of that, right? The only moment I'll choose to kind of not do this and try to find another way to reach my goals is if I feel like I'm near death. That's it, right? That was my sort of limit. So I just decided I'm going to try to go back into this. Hopefully it doesn't feel like it did last time when I was younger. But I'm going to do it again, right? And this time I'm like, you know what? Let me not try to find a job where I at least sit down. I don't want to be on my feet all day, because that was terrible before. So it took a little while to get the proper jobs and set everything up. And then everything was set, right? So I actually wasn't really planning for it, but I actually had 3 jobs, right? Technically I had 3. I'll explain that in a moment. But I had 3 jobs, and they had the proper schedule that I could work with, right? And so I just started working like crazy, right? So I started working, generally it's like 70 hours a week, but a lot of times I would do overtime and I would sign up. My 3rd job was actually Amazon. It was like a flex job, right? So I had a full-time job, a part-time job that was 20 hours. Then I had a flex job, which was, I think it was like 5.5 hour shifts, but I could sign up, right? I only had to sign up once a month. So it didn't really matter if I didn't go this week or that week. So, but ultimately I had 3 jobs. And I just started working like crazy, right? So I remember one time, and I talk about in the book, and I did this more than once. I would work like my 8-hour shift, then I'd go to the next job, work 4 hours, so that's 12 hours. Then I would do a 5.5 hour shift at my 3rd job. Then I would go back to my first job. I'd sleep in the car and then go there again and do overtime again. So I'd do more hours. So I was doing this like regularly. I just kept working nonstop, right? because I kept thinking in my mind, I have to achieve this goal, I have to achieve this goal, I have to achieve this goal, right? And I was actually around that time still studying a lot of these principles. Interesting enough, at that time I was actually trying to figure out how to control my chi, right? So that's where I was, right? Which controlling your chi is so easy to do. We talk about it in chapter 8 of book 2, right? You're going to see how easy it is to do that. But at that time, I didn't know how to do it. And so it was like the hardest thing I've ever done, right? Was trying to learn how to control my chi. No matter what I did, I just couldn't figure it out. And then when I figured it out, I couldn't believe how simple it was. But I didn't understand a lot of the principles of the subconscious at that time. But that's when I was studying this, but I kind of put that to the side a little bit so I could focus on these goals. And I just kept working and working and working. And I was expecting to kind of feel as bad as I did when I was younger. And that's really what I want to talk about in this video, because what I noticed is something very interesting happened, right? Something that didn't happen when I was younger. I was expecting to feel so stressed and so tired and overworked and my body aching, but that didn't happen, right? Something kind of amazing happened, right? I noticed that my body actually changed, started to change in response to me doing all of this, right? And I didn't feel nearly as bad as I thought I was going to, right? It was like my body somehow became much stronger, much sturdier, right? I could work longer hours, right? I didn't need as much sleep as I thought I did, right? I can go off a very small amount of sleep and just go work the rest of the day. Just fine, really. I was still tired, don't get me wrong. But again, just not as much as I was expecting. My body, for the most part, can handle it, right? And even the sort of dread of working, right? Because it's like, most of us would just want to, if we're not in the job we really care about like that, some people do have jobs where they're emotionally invested in the outcome of the job, right? So it's a little different when you are, right? In this case, I didn't care at all, right? So when you have a job like that, you're just kind of going through the motions. It's kind of soulless, right? So it has a soulless sort of feel to it, and you kind of are just waiting to punch out and go home so you could kind of relax. And so in those jobs, there's a lot of dread sort of to, going to work, especially doing overtime and things like that. But I didn't really feel that, right? I was working like regularly. I was working because I was doing overtime too. I was working like 12-hour days, 15-hour days, 16-hour days. A lot of times it would go into the next day. Like I actually started just sleeping in the car because it would take too much time to sort of go to my apartment and then come back to work. I would lose precious sleep, right? So I had a strategy to it. So depending on how much overtime I was going to do, I would just sleep in the car, right, to get more hours of sleep and then go to work. And so, but I noticed, like I said, that I didn't need as much sleep, and I just didn't feel as bad overall, and nor did my body, right? And I was shocked by that. I was like, because all these years I had this idea that if I worked really hard, it was like a form of self-abuse, and I was going to feel the way I did when I felt like my legs were about to break, and I'm like almost passing out from being tired while I'm walking, right? And I was always thinking that was going to happen again if I really pushed myself, and it completely didn't, right? And it was just amazing how much more my body could handle it, and my mind could handle all this work, right? And I wasn't expecting that. So that's what I want to talk about in this video. So why did that happen? How did that occur? How was it that I could work so many hours, like 70 to 80 hours a week, off so little sleep? Whereas I was more tired before I was doing that, when I was working way less hours. It's like I got more sleep and I was more tired than I was when I was working every day, right? So, and how does that occur? How is my body so productive, in other words? Well, ultimately it comes down to how my body was affected by my subconscious, which I didn't know about the subconscious when I was like 22. I did know about the subconscious at this time, right? But what occurred, and I'll just put it here, I'll go over this first point here, is that the subconscious has the ability to compel the body in a way that enables it to become more productive. So we talked about in chapter, I think it was 6. Yeah, so we talked about in chapter 6 how when you have a prolonged charge, and I'll talk about that in a moment, these kind of are the same points, really. But we talked about how when you have a prolonged charge, right? Or more specifically, we said that the subconscious is able to compel the body just like it can compel the mind. And when you have a prolonged charge, when you charge the subconscious for a long period of time, body starts to change as a result of that compulsion that occurs on the body. And what I noticed is that you can actually charge your subconscious in a way that compels the body in a way that causes it to change to be more productive, right? And to just go over this point, because that's basically it. A prolonged charge that adds more and more energy to a belief. That adds more energy to the belief that you need to work causes the body to change in a way that allows you to do so. So in other words, during this time, and I wasn't really intending to do this. This was just a natural phenomenon that occurs as a result of subconscious activity, right? It occurs whether you're consciously aware of it or not. Now, I know how these things work on a conscious level, but I wasn't like making the effort to perform this charge. But what I kept doing was I kept asserting the intention that I needed to achieve this goal and that I needed to work to achieve it. So I kept saying every day, I'm like, I need to go to work. I need to get more hours. And every day I was measuring how much money I had. I would calculate my check down to like sometimes I was so accurate with it because I would calculate it down to like the decimals. I'm not saying it was precisely what I calculated like down to the dollar amount and only the cents was different. But I would just incorporate even the decimal place in my calculations of all my hours and everything I did. And I would calculate exactly how much my check was going to be. And I would know how many more hours I need. I would calculate how much money I was going to make every week until I reached my goal. And I calculated months in advance. I performed all these mathematical calculations. And so that's why I kept knowing, I want to get this many hours this week. And I kept signing up for overtime or extra shifts at my third job. And what I kept doing was producing the intention that I need to work more, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to go to work, I need to achieve this goal. And so what ended up happening, which was, like I said, it wasn't necessarily intended, but what ended up happening was I kept going in and out of a transcendental state while holding the intention of focusing on that goal, of achieving that goal, and I would enter a transcendental state and I would charge the belief, right, that I have to work and that I'm going to work and that I'm going to achieve this goal. Now, this ultimately ties into what I call a manifestation charge, which we'll talk about that in book 2, right? But this is kind of a prelude or a precursor to that. So you're going to see how important belief is with that type of charge. So I just kept holding that belief, right? And again, that wasn't my plan. I wasn't saying, let me charge this belief so that I could accomplish this. We'll talk more about how that works in book 2, because you can't do that. But I was just doing it, just happened to be doing that. And then I began to notice it. Like, I would feel so much more energized, right? My body felt so much more sturdy. I didn't need as much sleep. And I just felt so ready to work. And it's like my body, I could feel it. Like my body changed in a way that I was just able to work. It was like my body was ready to work, And then I realized, and so we actually talked about in chapter 3 about the efficiency of transcendental control, which this isn't exactly transcendental control, but we did mention how when you control the body with your positive mind, it's much more efficient, right? It's much smoother and more efficient than controlling it with the negative mind, right? And in this case, my body actually changed in a way that made it more efficient. So I could work longer hours with less sleep, right? And I could recover faster, way faster than I could when I didn't charge this belief. So that's why even when I was working way less hours, I was more tired, right? And I was more sort of exhausted off regular short shifts. And the reason was because I didn't charge this belief in that case, right? But when I charged this belief that I need to work, it compelled my body to charge in a way that allowed me to achieve that goal. So my body responded to the state of my subconscious in a way that reflects the belief or the outcome that I wanted. Right? So it changed in a way that allowed me to just work like crazy because that was the intention I kept producing. And that was kind of amazing because I remember there'd be times where usually I had like a short time excuse me. So usually I had like a short time on the weekend, right, where I could just relax. Like that was like one of my like few days where I just had like a spate of time to relax. And I actually did a lot of times still sign up for overtime at nighttime at my other job. But I had like a good chunk of the day to just relax and chill. And I remember when I would do that, I would like go to sleep and then I'd wake up, right, and I would feel ready to work. I just kept feeling like I'm wasting time if I'm not working and making more money. You know what I mean? And everybody who's kind of done that kind of, I'm pretty sure knows what I'm talking about, who's been in that phase. Because when your body charges, like when you keep putting that type of belief in your short-term memory and then you deep charge it, which is what I did, and it becomes part of your mood. And that mood creates an ambient compulsion on your body or force on your body, which causes it to change, but also on your mind. And so you keep being in this mood to work, right? And you like, I kept feeling like I'm wasting precious time, just sitting around doing nothing, right? So generally that's what you kind of want, right? So work is the thing you just want to get out of as fast as possible so you could go back to relaxing. But in this period of time, it changed. Like I didn't really care that much to relax or enjoy myself, right? I could do it for like an hour, maybe two, but I'm like, I want to go back to work and make money. Because I just felt like ultimately it came down to time is money, right? Which you've heard that before. And I'm like, if I'm not working, I'm wasting time. If I'm not working and making money, I'm just completely wasting time. And I'm not getting anything out of being here, right? Just chilling. And so that's why I could sign up with overtime so much. Oh, and one other thing I'll mention is my perception became altered, right? So that's what happens when you charge your subconscious. But in this case, my perception became altered in a way where I just didn't have that dread of work. You know what I mean? Like everyone kind of probably knows what I'm talking about. If you've been in the working world even for a little bit of time, like when you're close to the end of a shift and then maybe a boss asks you to work extra time, and you're like, oh my God, right? Because you were expecting to go home. And just the dread you feel when you realize you're out of nowhere that you're going to have to stay at work longer. Or if they offer overtime and you just think about the idea of, being at work longer or earlier, kind of just like there's a sense of dread to it. But I didn't really feel that anymore because I kept signing up for overtime. I couldn't wait for them to offer more overtime. You know what I mean? I signed up for more work every day. And so what actually ended up happening is the idea of being at work longer developed negative memory, right? So I couldn't focus, my subconscious wasn't as volatile to thoughts about staying at work. So that would have been like kind of like a shock charge because it's so rare that I do it. Then when I do it, it feels new again. And so my subconscious becomes volatile toward it, and I charge a negative frequency at the idea. Like, oh, I don't want to do that. Because I did it all the time, there was negative memory, and I just didn't feel dread at being at work. I could be there all day, right? Sometimes I'd be working almost 12 hours, not straight because I had to go to different jobs, but I'd just be working for a very long time. I'd work 8 hours one job and I'd go to the next. I'd work 4 hours there and I'd go to the next. Work 5.5 hours there, then I'd go like have a little bit of sleep and just do it over again. And it didn't really bother me. Sometimes, oh yeah, that's another thing. There would be days where I'd sign up for 2 shifts at Amazon, right? 1 in the morning and 1 at night. Actually, I think there were 3 shifts throughout the day. No, there were multiple shifts, and I would pick them in a way that was back to back, but I would have to sleep in the car for maybe like 1 or 2 hours. And I would pick 2. When I leave 1 shift, I relax a little and go back again. So, and I just kept signing up for more work, right? And I just didn't feel the dread. Like, because normally when I used to sign up for overtime or be at work longer, I'm like, oh my gosh, I would keep looking at the clock nonstop. And I didn't have to do that this time. I was so used to working, it was just a regular day. It was like, there was no need to look at the clock because it was almost like nothing else, right? It's kind of hard to explain it, but like, if you work all the time, it just becomes almost part of your identity, right? The moments you're not working is kind of the weird thing that you feel a little bit funny, being in. So for me, it just became a regular part of the day to be working. I didn't even question it anymore. I just did it, right? And stopped really thinking about what it's like to not be working. And so my perception became altered in that I didn't feel the dread of staying at work all day and signing up for it. I just became so comfortable with it. And so basically what I learned from that experience is what I call transcendental productivity, right? So if you're really focused on a goal and you really want to achieve it, right, and you keep producing an intention to achieve it, right, even if it requires a lot of work, if you keep holding that intention, your body's actually going to change in response. So it could change in the short term, because I've done that at work too. When you're just really into your work, right, you're going to notice that you're moving faster and you're just more zoned in, right, or zoomed into your work. Really, and you're in the zone, like just focused on working and achieving what you need to do. And so, so that's transcendental productivity. And I think everyone who's kind of done that, right, who's had projects in their life that they really need to just work on, and they just need to push everything off and just focus on it because it was very important to them, probably knows what I'm talking about. That you just went into the zone and just started working, and you started getting you were more productive than you've probably ever been in your life, right? Because your idea of how productive you can be is probably rather limited because you're limiting it to your normal performance level. But when you get into this zone, you're going to realize your ability to be productive is far beyond what you thought, right? I remember when I first started writing the book, right? So this was in, I first started writing the book, I think in 2020, right? In early 2020. And around that time, probably you will imagine, or you might feel, that the book and this theory has a whole bunch of structure to it now. But it absolutely did not start that way, right? So I was basically just making it up as I went along because I didn't put it into a theoretical structure yet. I was still figuring out how to do the curriculum, what chapters I should make all these ideas into, because I'm using all of these ideas at one time. I didn't learn it in ordered curriculum like I'm teaching it to you now, right? To me, all the ideas were used at once. Excuse me. So all the ideas I used, all the ideas I had, I all used at one time, all the time. So I'm like, how would I explain it? I feel like if I start explaining one idea, then I'm leaving out like eight other ideas, which this idea won't make sense without them. So I was kind of creating the curriculum and everything. So it was all completely new to me at the time, right? And I would just keep writing, right? And I would plan out the chapter a little bit, but then I would just which didn't make any sense, but I didn't know it at the time. I just kind of kept writing without planning it more fully. Eventually I did. I was like, no, I need to plan the chapter first. What I actually ended up doing was, not that this is super important, but I ended up sort of saying the whole chapter in my mind, because what I would do is charge my transcendental belief. Because remember what I said, the transcendental belief has like almost a memory component like computer memory. So you can hold on to more information at one time in your mind at once, depending how charged the belief is, which is a consequence of altered perception. And so when I would say the whole chapter in my mind, like sometimes I would do it more than once, I would have all this information in my mind at once, so then I could write it properly. If I wrote like a whole chapter and I forgot one thing, it completely messes up the sort of flow of the whole chapter. It's too hard to just put it in anywhere now. I would do that, but I didn't like doing that because it kind of messed everything up. So I wanted to have everything in my mind as I wrote. And again, this isn't super important, but my point is, as I remember, there would be days where I'm writing the book for I was typing it for 12, sometimes 14 hours, right? My back used to hurt because I would sit for so long just typing, right? But that's an example of transcendental productivity. When you're really focused on something and you're really invested in the project. I had no ideas about money back then, still don't care about money. I was never doing any of this for the purpose of money. I just cared about it, right? This was important to me. And so when you're really focused on a goal and you're really invested in it and you keep producing this intention, this belief to achieve this goal and accomplish it, you're going to charge in a way where you reach a state of transcendental productivity. It's like a zone that you could tap into and you can just get more work done and accomplish more. That just, like I said, goes far beyond what you can accomplish in a normal state of mind or a normal performance level. And so I think, like I said, everybody who's had a project like that or a moment in their life where they were completely invested in a goal that required them to work a lot, you guys know what I'm talking about. And bosses, right? So bosses who have workers, they also know what I'm talking about because they know the workers who have this charge, right? Who are just super productive, right? And then the ones who completely cut corners, take shortcuts, or never put in their full effort, right? Never even put in really a good faith effort. They're just really seeing what they can get away with, right? Every boss knows workers like that. And so, and by the way, workers who do that, right, their problem actually comes to this third thing. Now, this third point here is that pleasure and achievement are antithetical to each other, which is really just a variation on the concept that pleasure and purpose are antithetical. But ultimately, what I mean by that is, I remember I was at my job, right, and I spoke. There was this girl, right, that one of my coworkers at the job who she knew everything I was doing, right, because I would tell her about all this stuff I was doing, all this work I was doing to reach my goal. And she was kind of like, I think, impressed and also inspired, which is, she actually told me she was inspired by everything I was doing because I was just working so much, right? And it didn't really seem like it was killing me, right? There was this attitude about me that was like positive, right? I wasn't being broken by working this much. It was like you could see there was an inner strength that I had that it brought out of me. And it was almost like it was just in my aura, right? It was, you can basically just say it was a positive sort of, it was coming from a positive place in my spirit in a way, right? In other words, I was almost empowered by working this hard, right? And so it was inspiring. And then she had financial goals too, but she didn't really like signing up for overtime. She felt that sense of dread, so she a lot of times didn't do it. And I told her what the secret was, right? So obviously I can't explain all of this to her, but I told her the secret is to put off things that feel good, right? Because this was fresh off the lesson that I had learned that I told you guys about, where if you charge too much pleasure, it alters your perception, right? And is antithetical to purpose. But what I was telling her was, in order for me to do this and charge my subconscious in this way, like I said, I wasn't really trying to perform this charge. I just kind of, unbeknownst to me, initially charged a transcendental productivity charge. But what I was initially doing at first was I didn't want to charge a lot of emotion. And the reason is I didn't want to feel that good. Because I knew that if I felt good, I knew that the intensity of emotion charged, right? And I knew that if I kept trying, which I could charge anytime I wanted to because I knew how to do all this stuff, but I stopped doing it because I knew the more I charge it, the better I'd feel, and good feelings are basically antithetical to working, right? Because of the way your short-term memory works. So in other words, if I keep charging positive emotions, right? Positive emotions, I keep charging it and I keep storing it in my short-term memory, then that feeling is going to grow more intense. And as it grows more intense and I'm more in a positive and emotionally pleasurable mood, I'm going to want more of it because it feels so good. The problem is that all this work that I keep doing, which is causing me to produce intentions that they're not necessarily evil, but they don't feel that great, right? When I'm at work and I'm doing the stuff I'm doing, I keep producing intentions that just aren't, they're related to work, right? So they're not loving, happy, joyous intentions. So I would immediately know those tensions are going to dampen my positive charge. So now they're at odds with each other. And sooner or later, right, that charge for pleasure and joy is going to alter my perception in a way that's going to make me not want to work today, right? Because I want to lean more into that good feeling. And I know the work is going to take away that good feeling, right? And so I knew that, right? So I'm like, no, I'm not going to charge any. So I just completely stopped charging positive emotions or any emotion in general. So then I kept being tempted, like I want to charge real quick, but I'm like, no, I'm not charging at all because I don't want my perception to be altered, right? It means nothing that you know how all this stuff works. The moment your subconscious charges and your perception is going to be altered, you're going to be sort of influenced by that charge. And so I was like, I stopped charging at all, and that's what allowed me to really tap in. That's actually what allowed me to charge my subconscious for purpose, right, and to focus on work. So, and I think people who have done this, right, even if you didn't know these principles, you know what I'm talking about. there'll be little things like that you could do that feel good that you're just like, no. You put off because you don't wanna sort of lean into that good feeling and then let it sort of take you out of your zone for working, right? So you push it away. And that's why you see a lot of people who basically accomplish big things, right? They make a lot of money or they build a company, they're entrepreneurs, right? A lot of times you'll see them just make sacrifices. They sacrifice certain things of like that would cause them to feel good. Be like, it'll be something small. Be like, just go out and like hang out with friends or just go out to eat. Why is that such a big deal? And they just won't do it. And it's ultimately because they're aware of these principles on a subconscious level. They don't want to get knocked out of their zone, right? So when you're accomplishing something big or like a big achievement, right, you're going to find people like that generally it's like they have to make sacrifices, right? Like I got invited to sort of go out. I think it was a couple of times around this time. I think it was to LA. It was either LA or Miami. And I did really want to go. But I'm like, no, like I can't. I need to focus on this goal, right? I don't want to get knocked out of my zone and waste money on that when I have all these goals to reach. You know what I mean? And so I just sacrificed a lot of things. I had to keep making sacrifices to different things related to, feeling good, right? And that's how I was able to stay in the zone, to focus on work, where I didn't feel this dread of work. My body could work way more hours with less sleep and less recovery. And it just allowed me to stay stuck in that zone by putting off things that felt good to me. And I was telling her that, right? Because what most people do is they keep trying to focus on things that feel good to them, right? So we live in a kind of society where there's all these stimuli that cause us to feel good, right? Or feel some type of emotion. And the problem with that is that the more you get it, the more you're going to want of it. When you get more of it, it's going to take you out of the zone that you need to be in to be able to endure working crazy long hours and being highly productive, right? Without it feeling bad. I didn't feel miserable every day and I'm like, I can't wait to be done with this and that, right? I felt all right. Like I was comfortable. That's what was so shocking to me, right? I was so much more comfortable working like 12, 15-hour days than I thought I was going to be. And the reason was because I was applying this principle. So basically what I'm getting at is pleasure and achievement are antithetical. And this is what I started to kind of tell young people that I come across, right? It's very important to find a cause, right, that you are really invested in. We'll talk more about this in chapter 2 because I think everyone has one that's given to them by God. But it's important to find a cause that book 2. But it's important to find the cause that you're really invested in and you really feel a sense of purpose in, right? And then just invest in it, right? But there'll be times when you need to reach a state. Like I didn't have to be that way every day ever since, right? There was a moment in my life where I had to do this. And there'll be times when you have to enter a state of transcendental productivity, right? And the key to achieving that is to just stop doing things that feel really good to you. You're going to have that sort of inner strength to resist them and just focus on working. And it feels very dreadful at first, right? But as you keep doing it, you're going to notice it no longer feels as dreadful or as emotionally difficult or whatever. It's actually going to feel kind of good, right? And working is good. We're going to talk more about that also in book 2 in terms of our relationship with God and things like that, that it's good to work. It is a holy thing to work and to work with a sense of purpose. Now, there are different types of works, right? There are negative forms of work that are not holy, but in general, working is a holy thing. And you feel a sense of goodness when you work. And your body, like I said, will even change to accommodate your charge, right? It'll change to accommodate your intention so it's able to work more efficiently. So if there's something in life you really want to accomplish, just recognize that pleasure is making it harder for you to accomplish it. Because the moment in order to feel a lot of pleasure, I forgot to say this. When I was in the zone, even when I would feel a little bit of pleasure, like I'm on my days off, like it was like very flat, right? It wasn't very intense. And I knew why, obviously, because I had deep charged this feeling of purpose. I specifically went out of my way to stop feeling pleasure. So I had deep charged these frequencies that were antithetical to pleasure. So it was dampening my ability to feel pleasure. And so whenever I would do one little thing that was supposed to make me feel good, like watch TV or whatever, like it would be so flat, right? And I knew how to make it higher. All I got to do is just keep charging it and then go away from this. But I didn't want to, right? And so most people are the opposite. They focus on pleasure, then they try to give a little bit of their effort to purpose, and then it doesn't work, right? Because in order to feel that feeling, in order to work hard and do it without it feeling dreadful or painful or like you're being tortured, right? Your subconscious has to be comfortable with it, and your perception has to be altered. So you have to charge your subconscious in a specific way so that you can work without it feeling horrible to you. Like you just feel good when you work. But to do that, you have to give up pleasure. And so that's what I was explaining to her. And most people keep trying to have pleasure plus the work. You can't. They're antithetical. Well, not you can't, but they're antithetical charges. It's very difficult to do that. You have to pick one, right? And you usually, like I said, you usually see this with people who are entrepreneurs or accomplish big things. They're not usually, heathens who focus on all these sort of pleasures and joys and things. They might do that later, right? When the company's established and they have a lot of money. But when they're building the company, they're not focused on getting as much fun as they can while focusing on purpose. There may be some exceptions, but usually you're going to see them completely sacrificing anything that feels good to them and just staying stuck on purpose and working. That they do this because that's a subconscious principle, right? These charges are antithetical to each other, and you need to kind of lean into the purpose-based charge and kind of resist pleasure. You have to resist it and push it away so you can stay in your zone and work harder, and you can perform a charge that causes your body to change so that you can work really hard, right? So I think that's it. I think that's everything I wanted to say. I'm trying to remember. Let me see. Just check the book. Yeah, that's pretty much everything. Yeah, that's everything. So I just thought that was important enough to mention here. For Annie, especially for young people or older people, who really want to work harder but find it difficult to. I hope these principles and these ideas kind of helped give you more insight into how the subconscious works in relation to, being productive. And so if you really want to accomplish a goal, say it one more time, if you really want to accomplish a goal, it's important to apply these, to enter a state of transcendental productivity. Oh yeah, one other thing I want to mention is, this is more of a cultural thing. I remember some time ago when Elon Musk took over Twitter. I think they call it X now. But when he first took it over, he was firing a whole bunch of people. And they were. I think he was talking about. Like I said, I don't really do social media. At least as of this recording, I haven't done really any social media. I plan to kind of tell people about the website and the book, which I'm just not a social media guy. I hate it pretty much, but I don't know. I just never was into it, but I'll have to do it eventually. But I remember hearing about how people were like sleeping on the floor at one point in these offices, and how he wanted to develop a culture of work. And I heard people say how Elon Musk works really, really hard. What that's actually playing into is exactly this principle, right? What he does is he works really hard because he understands this zone, right? This zone where you can become way more productive than normal, right? And so he knows how to lean into it and kind of stay there and go back to it whenever he wants to because he's used to it. What he's wanting, though, is he wants other people to sort of, his workers, and I don't know if it's still like that now, but at the time, he wanted other workers to kind of enter the zone. He wanted to just cut the fat. Whoever is not working in the zone, right, of transcendental productivity, he doesn't want. And when I was hearing that, I'm like, I can understand why a boss of a company would obviously want their workers to all be in the zone. But what I was thinking at the time is that you're almost kind of robbing them of their dreams, right? So it's almost like a spiritual attack, right? We're going to talk about spiritual attacks in book 2 in chapter 5. But it's almost like a spiritual attack. And the reason I describe it that way is because when I did this, right, this was because this is not something you can do using your negative mind, obviously, right? Because it's transcendental. But when to do it transcendentally, you have to produce an intention continuously in a way that reflects what you really want, what your spirit truly wants. right? So, in other words, it has to be something that you're truly invested in and is truly important to you, which this was, right? So, accomplishing, which I did reach my goal, by the way. Actually, it was kind of amazing. I reached my goal in a very short time because I was working so much, right? But that financial goal was super important to me. Like I said, I was willing to work as much as I could until like I was near dying, like I was near death. It was the only way I was going to stop, right? That's how important it was to me. And when I was first writing the book, where I also entered that state, writing the book and coming up with the curriculum for this book and these ideas was very important to me. So I was invested in my dream, right? That's why, that was the reason I entered this state. And I still had a job, but I had to have it, in order for me to do this, I needed a job that didn't require a lot of my subconscious energy, right? Because some jobs will require you much more of your subconscious energy because you have to reach a certain level of transcendental performance, right? And I think ultimately in every job, you'll probably eventually reach a negative level of performance, and you'll just use your long-term subconscious paths. But they're still going to be charged up a little bit because you're doing it every day, right? But negative memory just prevents it from charging out of control. But for the most part, your job will require certain amount of your subconscious energy, right? A certain, it'll just basically require a certain amount of your attention overall, so you can dedicate your subconscious energy to this goal, right? And for me to do all this and to write the book, to write the book, I needed a job that didn't require a lot of my subconscious, right? That I can just do, not think about it very much, be very negative minded as I'm doing the work, and just go back to home and writing the book and entering a transcendental state and deep charging all the subconscious paths needed for writing a book, which I developed. And I needed my subconscious energy, in other words, to focus on my real goal. And so when you're at it, like, in my opinion, it's unrealistic to have a company where everyone has this kind of charge going on. It just doesn't make sense, right? You could ask them for that and you could try to force it, but like then what? How is their dreams are not your company, right? Your dreams are your company. They have dreams for their life and things that they need to do and things they need to accomplish, right? And so that's why I say it's almost like a spiritual attack, because you suppress their spirit and their ability to focus on the goals that truly matter to them. Like, imagine if someone told me that I have to, they're requiring me to enter this transcendental state of performance, which is going to require a huge amount of my attention to perform the necessary transcendental performance charge and charge all these subconscious paths for it and maintain the long-term charge so my body changes and everything, and I have to keep my subconscious charged up to maintain that state of my body. Like, imagine if I was doing all that while trying to write the book. I actually stopped writing the book when I was doing this because writing the book took up way too much of my focus and way too much of a subconscious energy charge, right? And so, that's kind of what I was thinking when I saw that. Like, it's not good to ask people to do that, right? The higher managers and the ones who have a goal in your company and want to move up and they're invested in the company, it's part of their dream, then that's different, right? But to try to force someone to have this level of investment, right, in your company actually robs them of their dream. Like, it's not good. So I kind of didn't like that. Now you might say, well, they can work anywhere else. Understood, but obviously that's not an overly realistic, right? It's not an overly realistic approach to life, right? Obviously, it would be wonderful, right, if I could just work anywhere that lets me perfectly do what I need to do so I can accomplish my goals, right? It's not that simple, right? They don't know if they leave the job. They don't know when they're necessarily going to get another one. They don't know if it's going to work out for them in the long term, right? It's a big change in terms of their income and things like that. So in our society, a lot of times it's safer to just stick with what you have, right? So it is a form ultimately of exploitation, right? To sort of you sort of leverage the risk of leaving the job with the security of staying in the job, but only if they use all of their subconscious energy to invest in your company, right? And just kind of rob them of their dreams. That's ultimately what it does, and although they don't have to, you still have leverage over their life, right? Which ultimately makes it a form of exploitation. So, like I said, I just didn't really like that. But in my case, I did just go to a job where I didn't have to think very much, so I could focus on my dreams. But yeah, so I just wanted to mention that here. And I think that's pretty much what I want to talk about. That's pretty much everything I want to talk about in this video. I did make another section in the book on money and motivation. I don't know that I really need to talk about that. You can kind of just read it. I think the next topic is the topic of confidence. So I'm going to talk about what I learned about confidence, and I don't know if I'm going to put it all in the next video. I might. I'm talking about what I learned about confidence and what I call the champion mindset and different personalities. And then I think that's it. Oh yeah, I got to talk about how subconscious energy works differently in the different sexes. But yeah, that's it for now. This video kind of went on too long, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.